Welcome, sublating spirits, to session 24 of Sessions of Spirit. For you guys that are just coming into this, you might have heard about it and you're coming late to the party. But I'm going to do a quick summary for you to bring you into eternity, basically. And I'm going to spend about 2 minutes giving you some context on how we got here. So I'm going to share my screen now for you. And it shouldn't take more than 2 minutes, even though we have 23 to cover. So the notes should be in the chat. If you're looking at this from some other period of time or place, they should be with this video and it should be free. This is a way to restructure world spirit in a practical manner, and you should have access. Okay, let us begin the summary now. So in the first session of Spirit, we talked about Hegel being the greatest philosopher because he had the humility to give credit to all the philosophers before him and sublate them into a unity. The second session was for 200 years, nobody understood that unity. The third session was about once you do understand it, you can change the world with your practical spirit. The fourth session is getting beyond the stereotypes of Hegel and grasping the first negation, which 5 leads you around the circle of reason once you truly begin him at the beginning. The sixth session is once you get to the end. It looks religious, but philosophy is about the sublation of religion, not the negation. The seventh is about this universal logic that creates that sublation, which is going to get us the Nobel Peace Prize for making it modern. The eighth session is about starting that universal logic with polemics, but 9, it's about the truth of those polemics being sublation as genuine refutation, as the polemic of polemics. The 10th session is about the masterclass Hegel gave us called the science of logic in that sublation. The 11th session is about how the science of logic is greatly underestimated. It's literally the ineffable speaking itself. The 12th session is about the purpose of life being this ineffability speaking itself. That's us in a living freedom. The 13th session is that we're all infinitely valuable and liberating each other. That's the point. The 14th session is about this feeling like literally being connected to something greater as God, and we're the children of God. 15 is that you can look at this non-theistically as atheistically connecting to your inner child and bringing out the subconscious in a profound way. The 16th is that our gurus have always been doing this through the science of logic implicit. The 17th is that we have to sublate old mysticism with new mysticism and grasp the power of now. The 18th session was about the limit of our reason in the moment of now is the limit of our fun and our flow. 19th is about when you really grasp this, the ultimate philosopher negates everybody with laughter. That's the ultimate polemic because it's just sublation. The 20th is that the ideal philosopher uses the synchronicity document to sublate all other philosophies. The 21st is that evil is just one-sidedness that we're going to sublate. 22 is that, you know, our global knowledge is not wise enough to handle our particular knowledge. We have disruptive technologies like CRISPR. That number 23, we're going to use this deep universal concrete logic with these practical tools to get them under control in a proper usage to liberate everybody in the purpose of life. Okay, so 24 now is starts off with SOS, which stands for Sessions of Spirit, but also Save Our Souls, because this is practical. Genuine philosophy is theoretical and practical. The title is Philosophers React in Negation, Genuine Philosophers React in Sublation. So let's get into the one paragraph summary of this session. It goes like this. When a philosopher grasps the universality of all things, or at least has come to the scientific realization to have the faith that the world is rational and we can know it in a spirit of wisdom, there is a continuity, smoothness, and flow that comes to the thinking being in presence of a philosopher. It is subspecie aeternitatis, I don't know why I can't pronounce it, aeternitatis, in the here and now. A gravity of perspective that conveys an immensity in the simplest gestures and words, as if the totality of the universe is being communicated all at once in single pieces of meaning. This creates a stable and enduring space for philosophical reflection and cultivation, where the wisdom of a philosopher that is truly present in this way has an unshakable energy to idealize in all situations due to this universality of this rational idea of all circumstances, condition, and particularity. This creates a space where an abstract philosopher loses patience and faith and reacts in a spirit of negation. But a genuine philosopher's first reaction is focused on sublation. Okay, if you want to follow me to part 3 in the essence notes, let us begin unpacking this and its true dialectical content. So we left off in the last session talking about how we're using these practical tools like the synchronicity document and the wisdom quiz to concretize this kind of theoretical concept of a universal logic. Noam Chomsky's calling this like a universal grammar. So even the empiricists, the non-mystical types, the analytic types, are looking at reality and realizing that we have reached a level where it's all coming together, and there must be some kind of underlying structure that we can't directly perceive, but it seems to be apparent in just the fact that we can communicate at all through language all across the world. And we all have our particular instances of it, but there's something universal going on behind there. And we're trying to track it down in biology and MRI scans and some really interesting things, but we're just realizing it's the science of logic, most likely underlying everything that Hegel wrote as his masterclass in Sublation and universal knowledge. But practically speaking, where is this universal knowledge in its realized form today? Like, is it actually, are we like 10 miles, like, is this way off in the future, we'll grasp it 100 years from now, or is this something we can do today? Well, we're going to figure that out today in this session. But first, even if you grasp this universal logic, it has two practical consequences. So today, where we're really at is not genuine philosophy, as we covered in the past. Where we're at today is philosophy that is mostly in the spirit of negation. And this is a term that we're sort of using. I have not found this term spirit of negation yet in Hegel, but it's just a way to explain a general attitude about philosophy. And he does say that this, in other words, he uses abstraction a lot, but this negation is the default mode of thinking. And so our default mode of philosophy is always kind of negative. It's critical. And having critical thinking is very important, but it's only the first step, right? Well, it's not really the first step. In terms of logic, there's 3 steps, right? So there's the abstract moment where you're holding something as sort of common sense knowledge. And then the second moment is what we traditionally think science and philosophy is about, where you get to criticize it and you don't fall into the religious trap of not questioning the revelations, right? The divine, gods that you have to listen to and be obedient to. But we also know that in atheism or in modern finite science, axioms are the same kind of thing. There are just these unquestioned, self-evident things you don't have to explain. They're just so obvious, right? But really, are they? Hegel says no. They're making the same sort of indeterminacy. So it's a great triumph, yes, to be able to negate and critique this first moment of logic into its dialectical moment of opposition, right? And this is where we have debates, and academia is very aggressive and a little bit cutthroat at the moment. Not everywhere. It has peace, right? It is growing. It's pretty much the most peaceful structure we have, besides maybe the hippies who are already like 10 steps ahead, but they're only there in emotion. It's immediacy. They're gifted. So we have to unfold this, and that's what spirit is. But right now it's being held back because we think we have philosophy, but we don't have genuine philosophy, not the kind Hegel says is the true essence of it. So when you come up against a philosopher, a modern philosopher, most of them, not all of them, some of them grasp sublation implicitly, but most of them, when you approach them, especially with a new concept or theory, will negate you. And that's all they'll know how to do, because they won't know how to sublate, right? So default, they'll just negate you, especially if you have power. So as our movement starts to gain momentum because it has universals in it, I think Hegel was right. World spirit comes to you and you can change the world because it has to have genuine philosophy in it, which are the universals that are eternal, right? They're the things that stay still in the infinite flux of particularity of our world, appearances, all that kind of stuff. So practically speaking, as we bring this concrete logic into the world, you're going to have interpersonal dynamics that are going to be very negative at first. And because this is going to go global, you're going to get it from every culture, from every language, from everywhere. Even our own philosophers. So even though we're identifying as philosophers, even our own kind is going to come and negate. There'll actually be some of the most intense in the beginning, because they've sharpened that dialectical moment, right? They're just they know how to look for the inner contradictions. Even if they don't know it's inner contradictions, they just know how to find those limits in you. So be prepared for that. That's going to happen. So these philosophers are unaware, and you have to have compassion for them. Don't give in to an abstract negation. They're abstractly negating you, right? So if you return it with another abstract negation, you're going to stay in the negative moment of reason. You're not going to get to what genuine philosophers are doing, which is the third point here in the notes. What are genuine philosophers doing? They are, yes, negating. We're not naive. We are doing that second moment of logic. In fact, we're doing all three. Abstract understanding, we are holding something affirmative. We are making a claim that there is a real philosophy in the world that we should be following, so we bring a wisdom, a concrete wisdom into the world. We're not sitting on nothingness and just being skeptics and negating everybody and feeling good about ourselves because we can't be negated because we don't have an affirmative system, right? That's what modern academia is doing now, is that if you have a system, you make sure that thing's ironclad. But most of the time, the philosophers are going around negating other people and saying, look, I'm kind of untouchable because I'm not actually making an affirmative claim. I'm just pointing out what you're doing wrong. It's a very safe position, but it's because people are scared. We're in a very dangerous kind of culture. You can ruin your career in a sentence, right? So there's very little space to actually have sublations. So we are doing the negative moment. We will be pointing out limits, but it's in a different kind of spirit. So the first one is in the spirit of negation. Genuine philosophers are in a spirit of sublation. So what is sublation? This is a maddening word by this point. If you haven't grasped what sublation is, and we're at session 24, you're getting angry because the ego wants to know. It wants to make sense because knowledge is power. It wants power over the world so it can feel secure and flow with it in the way it wants, which is often limited, which is why it attracts the opposite. But anyway, psychoanalysis aside, I created a little list here to help us understand why it's hard to understand sublation when Hegel's talking about it, because he's doing it in a living way. That means he's doing it all at once. So it gets a little confusing. But the genuine philosopher is doing sublation through that first negation into another negation. Okay, so we aren't being naive. We are doing that first negation, and it's going to lead to a second negation. And this is what ordinary consciousness doesn't grasp. It's good at the separating, but when we have to do a return, it's the thing we are missing universally across the world. So you can think about it in this first way as negative only. So the negative form of sublation is, as Hegel says in his writings, negation of negation. So you have the first negation, the abstract painful moment, and then you have the negation of that whole negation in general. Okay, that's the negative way. It's all just negation, right? Because Hegel doesn't have a method at the beginning that he assumes. It's literally just the presuppositionlessness working its way as negation through its own dialectic. That might not make sense at this point. We're going to cover that a little bit more tomorrow or next session. But there's also a different way you can think about it. The second way, which is the positive form, which is that there's a preservation, there's a cancellation, and then there's a raising. So when you have concepts coming into each other, you have two philosophers interfacing with each other, so you and another person, they're going to have a system. Whether they say it or not, it's implicit in them, or they're making it explicit if they're being honest. So you will also have a system, and we're being very honest ourselves. We're saying it's Hegelian, but more likely or not, in your case, it's a synthesis of many things, especially if you're older, you have a lot of life experience and you've sublated a lot of things, to be honest. You just absorb it. That's what your natural wisdom is. So you're going to have these systems come up against each other. And when you're negating, doing that default negation, to sublate, you have to preserve something in the other person's philosophy that is actually true. If it's real philosophy, it's not just opinion, it actually has a universal in there. And you're just clarifying it in a polemical moment, right? But then you're going to not just preserve, you're going to cancel the limit of that truth, which is the limit of their philosophy. You're not going to throw the whole thing out with the bathwater, right? That's what abstract philosophers are doing. The first kind of philosophers, right? You're going to just cancel the limit, which is going to preserve the truth. And because you have the limit and the truth together at the same time, it creates a clarity that sublates and raises you. It creates that third logical movement. It raises you to a higher perspective where you can look back on that truth in its true clarity, its true limit, and its actual essence. So that's two ways to think about it, right? And we know that the first type of philosophers they're good at the second part of that positive way of describing sublation, but they're not very good at the first one, and they're not very good at the third one. So even if they do overcome the limit, it's like a whole new system starts over. It's like, okay, that's all garbage, and we're starting sort of like taking for granted that we had made a big move. So it's confusing, but I hope those two ways help clarify what Hegel is doing when he's talking about it in his writing. You'll see him flipping between those two forms. But there's also a third and fourth form that I think is quite novel and isn't often talked about that will also help you. So he also describes the first part of sublation, or he describes the first negations sometimes as self-sublations. So there's a speculative nature of things where everything is opposite is happening all at once, but you have to grasp it in its right order on the circle of reason. And to be clear, guys, circle of reason is also another sort of term I made up to help synthesize things that Hegel is doing in his philosophy. So I took his concept of, he says directly in his philosophy that real philosophy is like a circle of circles. So you will find that in him directly. And I'm synthesizing that with this other famous saying of his, which is that the reasonable is actual and actual is reasonable, right? So we take the circles and everything on the circle is reason, if it's genuine philosophy. So it's the circle of reason. That's how I got that. So people will start negating you as this goes global, and they're going to say, that's Marx's interpretation. Like they're going to negate me, right? They're going to say, that's not what Hegel really says. Well, if you go into the comment section, and if you can't see the comment section, somebody told me they couldn't see my comments. Download the document, it's free. Open it up in your own text editor. The comments are what are going to protect you from these intense negations from these really sophisticated philosophers. Those are direct quotes from Hegel on the more controversial interpretations that I'm bringing to speculative thought. More often than not, they're going to try and put you in a one-sidedness. So I'm trying to give you, I know where my interpretations are unconventional, but I think it's the real way Hegel's talking. So I'm going to try and give you the direct quotes so that my explanations are actually aligning with something substantial in Hegel. In terms of this inner sublation, this self-sublation stuff, and the circle of reason, I explained it for you now. Self-sublation is really just negation in the positive way of thinking about it. So when you go from pure being to pure nothing, that very first move in the science of logic, yes, it's an abstract negation, but it's also in a way preserving itself, canceling itself, and raising itself to something else, right? But at first, it's not really clear because you can't really assume the positive interpretation. There's something you're taking for granted. So that's why Hegel doesn't use that language very much in the beginning. But it really is this kind of like movement, but it's in an inner way. It's happening through dialectic. But there's a second way he talks about it. And I think in my reading, I identified this moment quite a few stages after the very beginning, when the stage of determinate being turns itself into quality, turns itself into reality. And then it's negation in general. So you get the first not abstract negation. It's abstract in different ways, but it's supposed to be a completion in a way. You have actual determinate negation now. For those that are just coming in, that this ain't going to make sense to you, but that's okay. We're just saying how we're getting to this other type of sublation. Once you have negation in general, you negate that. You negate the generality of it. And then you go into another inward movement. So you are doing like a self-sublation too, right? You are going inwards to the pure something. So that kind of generality to a particularity is implicit. You don't have universality and particularity yet. That comes way later, right? But the movements are all fractal. They're all kind of repeating the same logic. But this is the moment where I think we're getting the actual sort of outer form of sublation, which is also kind of inner. Those also switch. But just for convenience sake, I'm going to put them in this term. Somebody might come and correct this later. But we're just starting a new way of thinking of Hegel. So this is pretty groundbreaking, I think. So I hope that helps you understand sublation and how to recognize when it's happening in these different forms. Hegel's doing them all at once. Okay, so you are hopefully becoming a genuine philosopher, not just theoretically, but more practically. And we're starting to give some context of what this is going to look like in our current epoch. You do have to understand sublation. If you go back in the previous sessions, they're almost all about sublation in some way. So you're starting to grasp the essence of what I'm trying to hit here. I think sublation is what is missing all across the world in philosophy. This will get you to genuine philosophy, in my opinion. So moving on now, The science of logic is just doing sublation over and over again. So that's how the categories are growing into each other in that like plant life living or plant like living way. Sounds incredible. It's an ontological and an epistemological move because of the first absolute negation. It's really hard to grasp that. So how do we take this masterclass? How do we take this concept of sublation and bring it into the world? Well, I think what I'm going to do to play my part and to kind of demonstrate it as an individual is I'm going to, well, I already have, I've started up a bunch of live feeds, and I'm going to encourage you guys to send me your smartest philosophers, your most negative people, your most skeptical, nihilist. Send me the people who are really in that negative moment of reason, and they're really usually good at it because that's why they're stuck there, right? Because the better you are at it, it doesn't mean you can sublate, because that's a transcendental move. That's a lateral move, right? So it's a different kind of intelligence, but it's the same intelligence. So send them, and I'm going to try and sublate somewhere between 100 to 1,000 people between now and the next 5 weeks, September 1st, when I run out of resources in my practical reality. I have enough food to last me till then to try and get this new spirit going as just a singular individual. But of course, it's not going to take off unless we get more people sublating. But I'm going to try and be the example and play my little role here on these live feeds. So when you truly grasp the universality of this, you can talk to anybody from any creed, any religion, any philosophy, anywhere. And as long as I have translation services in any language. Like we said, you can read Hegel not in German and still grasp the essence, but you have to grasp the universal grammar, which is the science of logic. If you don't grasp that, then you will have these weird, different ways of going about it. But once you do grasp it, it's beautiful. You love how the French do it. You love how the Germans do it. You love how the English do it. You love how the Russians do it. It becomes more enjoyable, actually. So the essence is sort of like, it will become boring a little bit if you just stick with the same thing, right? Hegel says you start to die if it just stays stagnant. There's a living version of this, though. That's what the absolute is. That's the contradiction. We'll get to that later. But it's the infinite particularities that will make this fun. So it turns into the game thing we talked about before, right? It turns into the flow state. It turns into the laughter. When you start feeling safe in that benign violation, that's what keeps it the essence alive, and it makes you want to look for it in everybody. It makes you want to love them. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually try and, in my embodiment of it, start sublating people. You will too. You're already doing it sort of in your life implicitly. We're just making it explicit. So is this really practical? 1,000 people, 5 live streams. Like, people are already calling you crazy, Mark. Like, this is really out there. Like, you even look like you're tired, and I am, because I'm getting it all set up. This is what the organizer has to do in the beginning of a movement. And I've been doing this for 10 years, so I don't burn out. I have the infinite vitality of an ocean brewing in me, so I'm extremely excited, and I'm very honored to play this role. But we do have to be realistic. So one person isn't going to change the world. It has to be a team thing. It has to be a spirit thing. So to help us get into this to another level of practical realism, for our more analytic types, I created this survey to help give us some clarity on where we really stand. How much work do we really have to do? And it's called the Universal Survey of Wisdom. When you start from a point of clarity, that's a genuinely philosophical start. We philosophers are aiming for clear thinking. So what does this survey look like? Well, I've sent you the Google form. So the reason why I'm using a Google form is that it's free. We are using one of the tech giants, right? That is sort of not sublating quite optimally, not ideally. So there is a little bit of a contradiction there that we're going to have to sublate, but it's the best we can do right now, at least in my opinion. If you think there's a better software that's more open source and can handle what the best case scenario. So the best case scenario is that this sucker goes worldwide and we get 8 billion people to vote on it. Do we have a system that has the infrastructure to handle 8 billion people potentially accessing a document in the next 5 weeks? You need some pretty robust architecture. And I have a funny feeling Google, either they believe and they start sublating with us, which they might, because there's good people everywhere in the system. For those that want to just negate Google, there are pure hearts in there that are trapped in the system, just like you're trapped in the system. The essence involves spirit everywhere because we have the faith that the world is rational. That means the people we come across are also rational in their heart of hearts. That's what Hegel is trying to tell us. You can have hope. Don't give into that sort of negative moment of reason only. So that's why I'm choosing the form. And it's not a spreadsheet. I was going to use a spreadsheet, but Google has limits on spreadsheets where you can only access like 500,000 edits per day, which is way less than 8 billion, right? So forms, though, are currently unregulated, but they will try and maybe get us to pay for it, which hopefully we start getting some gifts coming in to the GoFundMe's, to the sources that are free, where we're not relying on venture capital yet. Yes, venture capitalists, you will also be sublated, but in the beginning, we have to have that kind of freedom. Then we can start paying for the accounts out of that freedom. But for now, this is unlimited. I put in the very beginning the rules. So you can see that I give you the link here, but the rules are, there's 3 kind of rules. So the first rule is you have 3 votes you can cast in amongst 3 areas. And of course, you recognize here, these 3 areas are the areas of Hegel's absolute spirit. He divides them into this kind of syllogism. Art comes first, then religion and philosophy. That's not an arbitrary order, because we know that in the circle of reason, everything is linked in its inner unity, in its necessity. Art necessarily, logically, has to come before religion. And I can explain that more in the tomorrow session or the next session. But I explain these rules that you have 3 votes. They can be across those 3 areas, but they don't have to all be in one area. So you can then, in rule number 2, decide how you want to split those 3 votes up. You can put them all in philosophy and vote for your top 3 philosophers. You can put them all in religion and vote for your top 3 religious sources of wisdom. And you can put them towards, well, the last rule is more specific. It's like, even though you're in the same domain, you can't give all 3 votes to the same source, to the same person or a system. And this is to kind of make sure that we have a sort of diversity of thinking. And it kind of makes people have to choose other secondary sources. And this is going to create a nice little gradient of a kind of spectrum. So we can kind of see the secondary preferences too, not just the primaries, because the primaries are basically going to be the main religions right now, right? So we want to get people thinking about this more concrete way of sharing wisdom. So notice I said sources of wisdom. I was going to make this originally just about philosophers, but philosophy is not in its true mode right now, right? So what we're going to get is a very truncated version, and people aren't going to feel the spirit called from them. So what I'm doing is I'm just saying it's a universal survey of wisdom in general. And Hegel says there is wisdom in art, there is wisdom in religion, there is wisdom, of course, in philosophy. It's just the form of wisdom that's changing, the amount of sensuousness in it. That's why our artists, they, in order to access the universal logic, they usually have to get into an inspired state, a trance, you know, the famous artist struggle. They're channeling the science of logic, the divine artistic logic, kind of through them. And they can't think, they're literally channeling it, right? But then religion comes along and says, yeah, we're channeling it, but we can actually write it down and like start getting the pure thoughts in concrete form in places where we can think about them. And then of course, philosophy is like the pure thought thinking itself, and we can grasp it as a part of our being and our own thinking. Very explicit. That's the point of philosophy. So you can divide up between those 3, but you can only choose one vote, one person, one source. So wisdom in general, that's why it applies to all 3. And I think this will get all 8 billion, because all 8 billion of us are in some version of those 3. But you can split them up. You can vote for your favorite philosopher, vote for your favorite theologian or religious source, ancient sources, mystical sources, and you can go into art as well and vote for your favorite artist. So those are the 3 rules. This is the structure, very, very simple. People with high IQs can do this. People with lower gifts in IQ, which we know is about 1/3 of probably the global population. Very simple. We're looking out for the vulnerable. Everybody has to be in the spirit. So those are the rules. I am going to put a legal disclaimer here, because I did one of these before, and there's rules to taking people's information. Thankfully, big data is just a mess, and we're going to respect people's privacy and let them know right away that they're giving real value here. So I haven't written it yet. I'm going to probably copy the other one, but that will protect us as this goes worldwide. We're not being naive. And then very simply, there's just all the philosophers. I mean, not the philosophers, all the sources of wisdom. And the order of this, of course, is going to be contentious because everybody thinks that their source is the best source. That's just human ego. So instead of making the order random, instead of going alphabetical, instead of going by bias, I just did what Hegel did, and I just did the history of philosophy. So we're just going to go from the oldest to the newest philosophies as they emerged in history. And that's just doing justice to history. So there's no preference except for the preference of history. So you can see here, we're starting with Egyptian sources of wisdom, but there could be newer ones. So in the next 10 days, if you guys see gaps here, like there are 2 sources of wisdom above these 2, but I can't remember what they are. I have somebody in my network that's going to tell me, but we're going to go as far back as we can. So once we start the survey, I don't think we can change it. And I think if we do change it, it won't be fair. So once we are ready to release this to the world, it actually is going to stay the same. So we got to do a pretty good job, or people won't feel like they can self-recognize with it. And recognition is an essential moment of dialectics and sublation, right? So I'm just starting there for that reason. But then, of course, we get Mayans after, and I put the dates there. So it kind of starts teaching people how philosophy evolved, how wisdom evolved through the ages. Hinduism, Judaism, Greek mythology, Buddhism, Confucius, Arians. You can see there's everybody here. The Orientals, everybody has a place here. So they can cast their vote. And they can cast for 3, right? And then we get into Plotinus and all the sort of people we think are philosophers. But if you have anybody in here we're missing, in the next 10 days, when I plan to launch this for voting, please suggest it in that time, because once I go global, we want to do a good job. And you guys are more maybe an expert in this way, especially our historians. So really, if you want this to turn out well, we have to do a job here. All I did is copied the columns of the synchronicity document, because the synchronicity document is just ordered in the same chronology, right? So I just copied the ones that are currently in the document here. So you can see that in the synchronicity document, we're just starting and we already have like what, 60? Oh, 63. But as far as I know, Google Forms don't have a limit. So we could have thousands, and maybe we will. But most of the votes will probably come to the ones that are well known, but the secondary and third ones will surprise us. And I think this survey will become very, very important to historians and to sociologists and cultural anthropologists and stuff like that. But for us, it's just going to give us an idea of where we need to start sublating. Okay, so looking forward to your guys' wisdom on this and making sure I don't screw it up. This is a team effort, and you have seen my flaws. Literally, with the Zizek presentation yesterday, I put, instead of Pinkert, I put Pippin for like my whole notes. And I didn't even notice that because I have so much particularities that I'm trying to sublate. But I will get better. I'm just catching up with the immensity that world spirit unlocks in you once you grasp this sublation, right? I hope that inspires you to participate. People are also going to create their own versions of this. So they're going to start racing us, and there's going to be a lot of cheating potentially in the beginning. So how do we get a real result? Well, we're actually going to do a second version of this. So we're going to launch 2 versions at the same time. So point D here is the first one is going to be the one, it's a free for all. Let the cheating happen, let whatever happen. But the second one, we're actually going to say you have to verify who you are to cast your vote, so we're not getting duplications. That means government ID, that means a verified email, that means like all the stuff governments do. We're going to be doing that all around the world using whatever identification the governments use to prove somebody's identity and uniqueness. That one will go way slower, and it will be all volunteer in the beginning. I'll be doing most of it until we can get more people taking the wisdom quiz, so I can hand over the admin. And just the only thing you can trust is sublation. I know that doesn't sound useful, but in my experience as an organizer and understanding Hegel now, at least a lot more than I did before, for me, it's the only thing. It's the only thing that creates the return and gets that moment of recognition and the valve on abandonment, where you won't get people abusing their power either subconsciously or consciously, or at least it greatly reduces the chances. Of course, dialectic will try and spin you. The path to hell is paved with good intentions, but at least we're aware of that now as genuine philosophers. So we will be submitting 2, but what will happen is the second one will purify who's lying in the first one. That's going to be the interesting thing. So we are going to put a disclaimer there saying that if you do cheat and you don't embrace this new spirit of honesty, it will come out. So don't reflect poorly on your source of wisdom. If you're a Christian and you're supposed to be honest, or you're a Muslim and you're supposed to be honest, don't hurt your religion by signing up 10 times and like selecting the same option to pump up your religion, right? We just want the truth. Where is our species at in our wisdom? And it will come out. The major religions, the major sources of philosophy, they will come out, right? So don't worry about that if you're scared. The truth protects in the end. And because we're embracing a spirit of sublation, it's just going to reintegrate anyway, even if there is a difference. I hope I put enough wisdom into this process to turn out how we want to turn out, or at least be useful. One example of somebody, so I am going to kind of break the 40-minute barrier here now that I'm paying for these Zoom sessions, thanks to the gifts that have already been generously gifted. Thank you to those, you know who you are. I wonder if I should just say Portland's being an amazing support right now. Michael, shout out to you. Thank you for being an agent of world history already. But yes, I will go a little bit longer on this session because I think we have to be thorough, because now we're starting to get practical and real negations are going to be coming if you want to be involved. I'm going to plow ahead for 5 weeks, whether you help or not, because I'm so kind of, my skeptical side has been satisfied by Hegel, at least to a point that I've never had it happen before. And I'm quite skeptical. I've been doing this for about 20 years. So I'm going to move ahead. And there's an example here of a conversation I had with somebody who was getting on board. And because they haven't passed the wisdom quiz, I immediately identified where they're going to not be a genuine philosopher and they're going to fall into abstract philosophy. So there's this concept of circle of reason, but there's also these two words that I think we should really adopt when we're doing this wisdom, doing this universal survey of wisdom. It's very wise to use these two words, because in the circle of wisdom, you are a circle of reason, you are going to have prior categories and later categories that are the sublations of these. So you're going to be tempted to say the later categories are the better ones, and these ones are inferior and discardable. That's the abstract version of refutation, which is not sublation. Genuine refutation is sublation, right? So what you want to do is avoid language that talks about things in abstraction. So this person was telling me that, yeah, religion is just a child, of philosophy, so therefore it's lesser. And child, if you say Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism is a child, there's an extra connotation there, which means that it's immature and that they're being immature. But we don't want to do that. It's kind of disrespectful. So you have to be very careful with your language. It is true, some of that is a little bit true, that there's a limit to it. The development hasn't developed all the way, but it's not a childish, there's a lot of maturity. They have the concrete totality in them. It's just the expression that some other people who don't have it in their consciousness, they're the ones that misinterpret it. But they do have the truth, or else it wouldn't be a persisting thing in history. Okay, so the divine masters of the past, the prophets, they were seeing it clearly, but it was the explication that wasn't even their own limit. It was the limit of their time, and they were grappling with the dialectics of their time, the sort of the limit and the ignorance of their time, right? The evil of their time, if you want to use that terminology. But we're going to say, okay, instead of saying child, we want to say this. We're not going to be a wolf in sheep's clothing and make things up and get into people's good graces and not be honest with them. No, we are going to say there is a real circle of reason and there is an order. But instead of saying child, use the word foundation, because that's the essence of what the child metaphor or the term is trying to get at. All the categories that come beforehand are the foundation of the previous ones. So that's the positive and the ideal way of talking about it. You'll never get rid of them, right? They're necessary, and that's very vindicating. Okay, so religion does come before philosophy, but it's the foundation. You can't have philosophy without moving through religion first. So we owe a lot to them, and society has a lot to owe to these developments too. But there is a lot of oppression. That's why we do need to sublate it, but we need to preserve something in that. So if you use the word foundation to talk about prior categories, that will protect you. That's the language of sublation rather than the language of abstraction. The later categories, you don't really want to use the parent metaphor. You want to use maybe fulfillment. Hegel uses these words quite often in his actual writings. So this isn't just me talking. If you look at the comments that I'm making, I give you a couple straight from Hegel's phenomenology of spirit, where he talks about these prior moments as foundational, and that the later ones are more like a fulfillment. There's many quotes. I didn't have time to give the more direct ones, but if you look at them, you will find these words as the goal. I sort of want to go through one of them because it's hard to interpret. So here, I'll just say this really quickly. you want to read this. Where are you? Okay, so I'll just start at the beginning. So, right in the preface of the Phenomenology of Spirit, paragraph 12, but this new world is no more a complete actuality than it is a newborn child. It is essential to bear this in mind. It comes on the scene for the first time in its immediacy or its notion. Just as little as a building is finished when its foundation has been laid, so little is the achieved notion of the whole itself. So what he's saying here is he's just saying even philosophy, even science itself begins with a beginning. And he's saying it's childlike, but really it's a foundation. And he's saying you can't stop at the foundation, you have to continue it. That's the sublating part that begins the circle of reason. So this is where I'm getting this language from. But he's using it in a much more mature way, and he's not applying this to any specific philosophy, which would be insulting. He's saying in general, which is less personal. It's harder to take it personally. But we're going to be getting pretty personal here. So I'm trying to protect you with this language that I find in him. It's more ideal. Okay, I give you another kind of quote in here as well. There is a wrong way to do this and a right way. Every conversation you have with somebody is a dialectic. At the basis of every complex situation, all diversities can be broken down into their essences that the science of logic sort of maps out, oppositions sort of sublating to other oppositions. So even on some of the most simple conversations, just on one opposition, you can have the conversation in 18,750 wrong or inadequate ways where you're not seeing, you're speaking past each other. Where you think they are is not where you think they are. There's like, if you really do all the permutations and combinations, there's like 18,000 ways of not doing this properly. That's why kind of having any communication that's rational at all is a human miracle. It's amazing. But there's only one true way to have an accurate and adequate conversation. And that's by seeing each other clearly, what the positions really are in that mess. You can go and calculate that for yourself. I'll give you sort of the structure of how I did it. I did it through something called the 16 paths. And then I kind of put Parmenides. Thank you for correcting me, Ed. I've been saying the names wrong, even though I know the right way to say the ancient Greek names. So just to prove it, it's not Heraclitus, it's Heraclitus. It's just me being overwhelmed a little bit. So I am sublating. But I called it the 16 Paths of Parmenides because Parmenides was sort of like really the first to get to the dialectical difficulty. So if you read Plato's tribute to him on, I think it was One and Many, whatever the dialogue is called, our scholars will know. It was very confusing because he's doing what Hegel does over and over again. So it's very hard to have these accurate conversations when they're truly speculative, because you have to grasp contradictions at the same time, and our ordinary understanding doesn't like that. So it's basically, though, the triadic structure on steroids. And even though you're not supposed to impose a methodology, there is one, but you can't start with it. So Hegel's on both sides. He says you don't start with it. The real method is just negation, but it develops itself later into a positive structure, which is the syllogism and this tripartite structure. You just need to do it in a living way. So here's me applying that to our interpersonal ethic, how we're going to start speaking to each other that doesn't repeat this 18,000 mess thing, but gets to the essence of the conversations. There are 16 paths here. There's 16 ways to have a conversation on any dialectic. The first is really painful. It's all painful, to be honest, until the very last column. So this is the only place where you move out of this hellish way, this very painful way of having dialectical discourse, that negative moment of reason. That's not sublation. There's only one way, and it's this very last category. So if you look at these little triangles here, this is the triadic structure, right? The famous sort of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, which Hegel never uses, but he does. He never puts them together, but he always uses them across the system. He just didn't want to be associated with Fichte and Kant and their broken, dead ways of doing it. So what we're doing here is we're saying, no, there's a way to do this that's right. This is sort of a dead way to do it. So you have to be very careful. This is a schema that I'm just using to make things simplified. So there's person one. The first triad is person one in the conversation. And the second triad, this guy here, is you, let's say. Or you could be the first one. But these two things are interacting on a dialectic. They're trying to converse about an opposition, let's say. So in this one, I say, here's person one's real position in the triad. The red dot is the real actual position in, like, It's where like we know, like we're the absolute and we have infinite knowledge. They might be deluded where they are, but that is not. This is their actual position in reality. Position one, position two, and this is how they experience the discussion. This is how they experience the subjective dialectic between them, right? So in this one, they really are both in D1, the first position, the first mode of understanding. So they're going to be automatic allies. Both of them are going to think they're allies to each other, but this is not real speculative thinking. This is not genuinely philosophical. This happens in nature all the time by accident. It's like when you go to school and you meet your friend, you're not philosophers when you become friends. You're just having a natural sublation happening, but it's implicit, right? So what'll happen is as you're experiencing reality, when a negation does come where your positions do change, like over here where you're like actual opposites, where's the actual opposites? Like here, this pink dot is where they're thinking he is, but they're not actually there, or they're here, but they're thinking they're on the same position as you. But when you actually realize you're in opposites, then you clash because you don't know how to sublate, right? So a friendship can turn into betrayal instantly. And that is what our culture is built on. It's like a house of cards. That's why it's kind of scary and painful. So we want to make sublation explicit to make sure we're not falling into this organic process, this natural sort of accidental stuff. This is what groupthink is. This is what cultural anthropologists are trying to uncover. What is groupthink? How do we get into this more genuine level of interaction? I'm giving you the dialectical structure, why and how I think this is happening. All of this stuff is some version of accidentality until both people are sublating. You can get one person sublating. This is what this last category is. One person, maybe you as a genuine philosopher, is always coming at every dialectic from this triadic, this sort of synthetic position, the fourth position, D4, right? You're not moving because you know that the truth is always a synthesis of the two. But the other person might not, right? But when you get two people that understand how to synthesize through internal dialectic, not external synthesis, that's a reflection. You want to do the dialectic, right? That's the only time that there is no dialectic that can rip you apart because you're both working together to sublate and clarify your positions. So even if it does separate you, there's a lot of space to return because you know the universal logic. It applies in every interpersonal dynamic. That's what we want to do. And that's what I'm going to be doing with these 1,000 people on the live feeds. I'm going to be holding this position no matter what comes at me because I trust that the world is rational and it is this dialectical process because I've seen it over and over and over again. You just have to clarify the dialectics, which Hegel gives us a really good starting point with the science of logic, and then applying it in the encyclopedia to nature and spirit. Okay, we're getting close to time, guys, here for the hour. I won't drag it over an hour. People are busy, but that's how you read this document. So if you don't know how to sublate, you are guaranteed in one of these other versions. I hope that's very profoundly clear. Even if you don't really agree with it, I hope as you go through these interactions, you realize that eventually this is a pattern. That's the power of sublation. I give you an example of non-ideal communication, and I give you an example of ideal communication here, where you are preserving somebody's truth, not just canceling them. So Texas was a good example where they didn't, initially they said, pick up the litter, and there was a negation, right? And they're like, no, no, no. But then they created a moment of self-recognition with the movement. And they said, no, there's something great about you Texans, us Texans. And it's that we're strong. People don't mess with us. And when you litter, it's a form of messing with us. So it was a beautiful self-reflexive thing. And that's what our language starts to approximate. You want to bring the best out of people when you interact with them. You will find the negative. You're not naive, but you're looking for that rational kernel of spirit in everything because it is there, if you believe Hegel. I'm going to give one last tricky example. So usually because this material is quite high and only like people who've done really intense philosophy get to Hegel, you will be attracting a lot of naturally high IQ intelligentsia, and they're really good at negating. So what I think is happening, these individuals are using abstract negation as a proof of how smart they are, because our current society does not validate properly intelligence. And because it's not based on sublation, they try and get the validation that they're smart through making you look like you're not smart, right? So it's this weird backwards dynamic, which doesn't need to happen when you sublate. So when somebody comes at you that's probably smarter than you, like there's going to be tons of people who have way higher IQs than me, but what protects you is literally that sublation can be grasped by everybody. So you know what they're doing. You know there's an unsublated dialectic in them, that it's just their awesome giftedness being oppressed. So if you recognize that and just, hey man, you got it, just grasp sublation. When they grasp sublation, that was when like things will supercharge, and our greatest minds will start becoming some of our greatest guardians. So that's how you don't want to fall into the abstract negation of them. And I'm going to check your ego. That's an abstract negation. Just love them with this wise love and say, hey, there's something amazing you're doing, but you're just pointing out limits. Even in me, you're just pointing out a limit, man. That's totally cool. I have a limit. Let's sublate it together. That's how you're going to get past people that are smarter than you. Awesome. I hope that makes sense to you. If you really feel inspired by this and that you feel like I'm grasping something, even if the particularities are a little bit off, the practical spirit now has a pretty substantial section. If you want to ask questions, ask them on the Facebook group. That's where I'm trying to address people. As like lots of people come in, we want it to start getting more universal. So the more people we can reach with every conversation, the more efficacious it is, the better use of time it is. Because you will get overwhelmed if you try and make this your everyday thing. So we need to provide a little bit of structure. If you're unsure how good you are at sublation, take the wisdom quiz. Everybody who wants to become an admin, you have to get 100% in all 26 dialectics. You got to sublate them all. Because remember, that last paradise part of the 16 paths, that means mastery. That means all dialectics, not just 26. There's thousands, maybe millions. So it's really just a way to make sure you grasp that process. If you do grasp sublation, start applying it in the synchronicity document. That's how we're going to win the Nobel Peace Prize, to get the money, to start really building the structures and start sharing with everybody in the world. If you want to get more practical and start suggesting technologies, there's CRISPR, there's some other groups that I'm starting, but CRISPR is the one moving really fast that I think we have a pretty good chance of getting in on because it's just new. And then of course, today's practical stuff is you can just take the universal survey of wisdom, give me the philosophers you think I'm missing, because I am. I'm just starting, guys. I'm a human being too, right? The stuff that's coming through me, world spirit, is the Hegel stuff. Once we do have it at a good place, share it with people who you think might have some contributions to make before August 1st. But then once August 1st comes, then just share it to get the actual votes. So there's the links to them directly. Here's my live feed. So if you want to start sublating with me, I'm on it right now. So here's my feed. There's my philosophical self. Hi guys. Oh, it's delayed. Anyway, there I am on the YouTube, but I also have, of course, the other main channels, which is Discord, Facebook, and Zoom. So you can send people to any one. We want to make it easy, and I'll just be jumping between my computers. And if once people pass the wisdom quiz, there will be other people in each one of those sublating too, because it's impossible for one person to do it, whether it's you, me, or anybody. So I hope you found that pretty cool.
For your information, somebody in the chat is saying the wisdom quiz is locked.
The wisdom quiz is locked. Why is that happening? Oh, did I put the wrong link there? Okay, I will definitely check into that, guys. The settings should be wide open, but thank you for telling me. And also, please keep correcting my embarrassing mistakes. I do have a lot of humility, so I am pronouncing names wrong. I'm doing things wrong because I'm blasting. I'm blasting through this stuff just to get the essentials out, to get you guys going too if you're interested. But I will fix that. Thank you. And then tomorrow, I also want you guys to realize, like, you can negate. Like, once you trust sublation, you can take negations way more smoothly, right? It's a really profoundly liberating thing. So tomorrow, I'm going to show, or hope to show you, one sublation that we absolutely have to do, because this will not work if we don't do it, in my opinion. So I will be taking this and saying, I'm not just going to keep doing it practically over and over and over again. We're actually going to go through one big one, and we're going to do a big sublation together tomorrow. And then this will really take a load off of you with like 85% of people you're going to engage with, I believe, if the surveys I've looked at are correct. So thank you so much, you guys, for coming. I hope you can feel the spirit, whether you're an atheist or a theist or polytheist or wherever you are in the circle of reason. I appreciate you. And if you want, join me for a discussion after I stop the recording. And have a fantastic day and keep sublating. Okay, finished at the top of the hour. Thank you for letting me talk, guys. Do you have any questions to start off with? while I switch over. Yes, sir, James.
Not connected. Okay, there I am. I was just wondering, the two diagrams on the group of 16, the group of 16 sublations. I'm just wondering, the two triads, they don't seem to have a heading, so I don't necessarily know. Is there any general designation that can be given to triad number 1 and number 2, or is the connection between the triads pretty random?
I wish we could share the screens. Like, do you mean, is my screen share still sharing? Can you see my hand here on the screen?
Right. So there's two triads, right? And you can see that there's a distinction in some of the columns. There's a distinction in the triads. Either a connection is emphasized or a node. But on the other hand, we don't. Is there any general way of understanding what you intended to be the first triad, the meaning of the first triad and second triad? The first triad would be the first sequentially to be considered, and the second would be the second sequentially. Is it that arbitrary, or is there some other heading that you could have given to the two triads?
So I just want to make sure we're clear, right? So the triads you're talking about, like, see my screen? This, you're talking about these triads, these two
The
triads
two
right
right
here, right?
columns that aren't columns. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I do in my other document, they are labeled. This is person 1, I call them, and this is person 2. So the table is supposed to correspond to these, but in this image, I didn't realize that I didn't have person 1 and person 2 up here. So hopefully people aren't too confused. Hopefully I clarified that, but yeah, there should be an actual label above these saying all of these are person 2 and all of these are person 1. So what's not changing here is the positions of the people, but the order. So you're right, we can go through and like put an actual title for each one of these. I just didn't have time in the past. So this combination, we can say yes is in draconian hell, like the wider category, but we could call this something like fundamental groupthink. And then the next one could be secondary groupthink. And then the third one could be first creation lock. And then the fourth one could be secondary creation lock. And like, we could have a unique identifier for each one of these, so we have a very efficacious language of pinpointing exactly where we think people are dialectically. And I just want to point out that people who think they grasp Hegel as methodless, they're going to say, Mark, this is the exact thing that Hegel said not to do. You're literally doing what he like chastises Leibniz for doing. His characteristicus, his universalis characteristicus, was literally just taking all the syllogistic forms and permutating them. And there's like 2,500 different types of syllogisms you can have just by like switching the positions one by one. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. The order is just, okay, we start up with this and then just keep this position the same and rotate all of these. Okay, now let's rotate this one to the next position, rotate all of these. I'm just arbitrarily doing the permutations and combinations. And Hegel says that's the dead way of doing the dialectic, but it's not necessarily the wrong way. So this is still useful, but it's not the true inner unity. So that's how when somebody comes with you with that quote, like there's one quote in specific that they're going to come and nail you with if you try and apply this in a discussion. But just address it the way I did. It's just a one-sided way, and we admit there's a limit to this, which means there might be more triads. There might be more combinations. And that's totally fine. We're going to allow those people to make those innovations because they might be geniuses. There's room for everybody. This is just to get us started, right? It's just 16 ways to get going. But you're right, they need more, they could have more clear labels. And I think that's an excellent idea.
Actually, I was
Did
only
you have a creative name?
I was only thinking of the heading myself. I wasn't suggesting that there needs to be another label, but that's entirely your elective. I just want to clarify, I was only suggesting that I didn't know what the heading, what the significance of the one node coming first and the other node coming second was, and you've clarified that perfectly, so thanks.
Okay, awesome stuff. Oh, 2 participants raised hands. Look at all these comments, guys. If I close the chat, will these be sent to me, or do you guys know? Or will they be erased?
You have to,
I thought I would
what
have
you
these
have to
sent.
do, actually what you have to do, Mark, is save the chat. So you'll create a file of your own when you click on the chat menu, and one of the options is save chat, and it creates a file on your PC in the special place where Zoom under I guess your ID, personal, something Zoom. It saves them in there. So it will save those files for you. You can also say open show location of file in that same menu, and it'll open up an Explorer window, which will allow you to locate the file like I just described. It's in a specific location for Zoom files.
Okay, yeah, for some reason, when I click on it, it doesn't have the option to save the chat directly, but maybe when I close the window, it will, but okay. I'll figure out the technicals after this.
Click on the ... specifically.
I am clicking on the ... I'll figure it out, guys. I guess we should just get to your real questions. I'll figure it out, James, after this, but I just don't want to like close the chat until I get to see all those comments, because there's probably a lot of discussion and not a lot of agreement yet. Probably a lot of negations, and I see some private messages too. So I don't want to feel like you guys, I'm ignoring you. But okay, James, did I address your comment?
You did, but I have one other, and I'll try to make it quick. The Ludwig Wittgenstein in the Tractatus Logicus Philosophicus, Logico Philosophicus, or something like that. In that Tractatus, it at the very last theme that he treats in the short book, he talks about the 16 node truth table. So that's a truth table of 4 binaries. It creates 16 nodes. So when I first saw your table, I thought of that. I thought, oh my gosh, this is a 16 node truth table. Well, not exactly, because it would have to have the 4 binary qualifications, which I don't think you have, but that doesn't even matter. It's just a coincidence that yours is 16 nodes, and that this is one of the main themes of the Tractatus.
I'm not 100% too surprised, because even last night I went to a Lacanian session, and James, you were there, and it was pretty amazing for me. Like, once you really grasp like the dialectical stuff, we're all just doing the same thing. So I think it's just like all these great guys were just doing the permutations, and they realized the opposite pairs always result in like 16 main pairs, no matter what phenomena you're talking about. So I think I just accidentally did the same thing as them. And I feel very sort of vindicated by you saying that, because it means I am just repeating the steps of greater minds than mine. So we're just catching up, right? So I appreciate you saying that, because you do have a much wider knowledge than I do in the particularities. And I used to have a pretty wide knowledge, but like I just learned too much. Like I just started forgetting stuff. And I think we're all starting to get to that limit, because it's impossible to handle the information load. So if you keep correcting me, James, I think that's only going to make things stronger. So I very much appreciate you doing that. And I will look into that. And if you can send that to me too, then I'll know exactly that I'm hitting on the thing.
It's the last, just check out the last, it's in the last 20 pages of the Tractatus. I'm not even sure if I have a copy. Well, I can find it online, but if you, yeah, I can send you a page number or something like that, where he starts that discussion. Yeah, it's just one of those things that whenever you have a logical 16 line table, it's going to look like what Wittgenstein was talking about. Not that, and he wasn't the originator. He's basically discussing a mathematician that wrote a paper on this. So I could possibly, so when I read it in Wittgenstein, I went and I got the paper, which is not extremely long, by that mathematician, and knew exactly what he was talking about. Wittgenstein just feels that the 16-point truth table is extremely extremely relevant. So that's why it's mentioned in the Tractatus. But of course, Wittgenstein is also famous for being the guy that threw out the Tractatus and decided that philosophy couldn't be based on those exact themes.
Wittgenstein. That's why, like, for him to do what he did without reading Hegel
Wittgenstein.
is a
Huh?
testament to his mind.
Well, he wasn't talking
Sorry?
about Hegel. He never read Hegel, as far as we know.
I know, I think my connection just cut out because my computer's freezing, which is what I'm worried about. If I lose the video, I'll be sad. That's why I want to close it before my computer freezes, but I just closed a couple of things. What I said was the fact that Wittgenstein didn't read Hegel and he still did all this amazing stuff is a testament to the greatness of his mind.
Well, it's hard to believe
So I
that.
guess I'm just repeating what you're saying.
It's hard to believe that he was not exposed to Hegel because he grew up in a family that was very cultured and interacted with a lot of the intellectuals at that time. So he was exposed to all the ideas around, all the philosophical, you know, all the philosophers and their logic and their thinking and their philosophies in that household. So it's hard to believe that he was not exposed to Hegel and all the great philosophers.
I agree with you. I think he did read it, but then he didn't want to spend the time. You guys, I'm recording this for some reason. Why am I recording? Sorry about that.